This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, Nassau, Bahamas.
The views and opinions of the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network.
Good night and welcome to The Doctor is In with me, Dr. Denothra Archer Cartwright. I know it's been a little bit of a break since I've done a live show. I don't know what's going on with my computer right now, but it's been a little while. I've been away. I took a little trip to Florida, took the family and everything like that. So that was great. And I must say, I hope that we move towards the openness of Florida. You know, there are no mask mandates or anything like that. So people were kind of, be able to kind of do what they wanted to do in a sense. People were wearing masks where they wanted to wear masks, and some indoor places, of course. But it was pretty much left up to the individual. Hey, something just happened. Okay. Something just, producer, I don't know, did I disappear? Am I still on air? Let's go down. I think I dropped off air. Okay. There we go. Sorry, I'm here. Just a mistake. Okay, I'm still on air. Great. Thank you very much. So welcome to The Doctor is In tonight with me, Dr. D. Archer Cartwright. I'm a family physician, a family medicine specialist. Tonight's show brought to you, of course, by Medical Concierge Services, where we get all of your primary care and healthcare needs. We're located on Collins Avenue, number 72 in the Heart Center building, also known as the Breast Center. You can find us quite easily. And so our numbers are 326-1521, 429-4880 if you want to use WhatsApp, but our direct line is 326-1521. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. People remind me to say The Doctor is In. That's underscore The Doctor is In. And you can also find me as well on Instagram. And we have a website, medicalconciergeservices.com. That is always a little bit of a mouthful, I guess. But with this show tonight, we have a very interesting topic. People have been asking me to talk about this for quite some time. It got a little controversial, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to go down that road. But I've had to do some research for various projects, as well as various guidelines that I was asked to participate in. So I had to really kind of look into it and do the reading around it. I've had some guests on my show, some fellow doctors who have used this medication in the past. And so, some people really swear by it. And so I kind of took an open approach to it and really kind of looked at the research, especially when I saw some negativity coming out about it. So we're going to have an open line tonight, basically, while I'm going to talk about a very interesting medication, which basically went from wonder drug to controversy. The drug's name is ivermectin, and some people have been kind of using it off-label for COVID since last year. And, people are just looking for different stuff that would have helped and looking for treatments because, we were quite focused on one way of going about things. And now as we are progressing through the pandemic, you can see treatment is becoming a very, very important part of the conversation. So it's important that we are able to look at all of that. and be able to give proper assessments and things and better understanding. So this has gotten a little controversial, but it's very interesting. So I'm going to go through a bit of the history on this drug so we kind of understand how things were looking prior to COVID, then kind of like why people thought, hey, why do we use ivermectin for a viral illness? And then, of course, what is the studies? What is the data really showing? Because you're hearing a lot of negative things all the time. And sometimes things aren't always what it seems to be. So we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. So we have an open line tonight as well, so I'm going to take other questions. Sometimes people just like to ask me different questions. So you're here with me, Dr. D, on the Dr. Zing. The phone lines tonight as 323-6232, 325-4316, and 325-4259. So the first kind of article that we're going to go through, I'm going to read some of it and just kind of highlight some important points so that we all kind of know what's going on. It's an article found in the PMC. So when doctors and scholars and people look for information, don't just look for just general articles or opinion pieces. We look for studies, or we look for academically written papers, those types of things. So they're found in different places and at different resources. So PMC, the U.S. National Library of Medicine and National Institute of Health published this particular article that was written coming out of the proceedings of the Japan Academy Series B Physical and Biological Science. It's called Ivermectin Wonder Drug from Japan, the Human Use Perspective. So you've heard some very ignorant comments about it being dewormer or horse medication, which is, let's say, partially true, but it's missing out the main factor that would really made ivermectin, I guess, special was the fact that they found how to take that compound and put it into a pill for human beings, and it really did some amazing things. This article is from the past, 2011, February 10th, and then we'll go to some more modules just to see how people talked about this drug in the science community before COVID. All right? So this is by Andy Crump and Satoshi Omura. And so it starts, the abstract of the article. Discovered in the late 1970s, the pioneering drug ivermectin, which is a dihydroderivative of avermectin, originally solely from a single microorganism isolated in Katasato Institute, Tokyo, Japan, from Japanese soil, has had an immeasurable beneficial impact in improving the lives and welfare of billions of people throughout the world. Billions of people they were talking about were affected in a positive light because of this drug. Originally introduced as a veterinary drug, and so that's where some of that comes from, but you can see how the drug was then developed for other things. It kills a wide range of internal and external parasites in commercial livestock and companion animals. It was quickly discovered to be ideal in combating two of the world's most devastating and disfiguring diseases, which have plagued the world's poor throughout the tropics for centuries. So they realized that, hey, it could be used in humans, and it actually targeted two organisms or parasites that had been devastating the world, especially poor countries. It's now being used free of charge as a sole tool in campaigns to eliminate both diseases globally. It is also being used to successfully overcome several other human diseases, and new uses for it are continually being found. This paper looks in depth at the events surrounding ivermectin's passage from being the huge success in animal health into a widespread use in humans, a development which has led many to describe it as a wonder drug. This was 2011. Wonder drug. Because of the many uses of ivermectin, they were finding that, hey, it was approved to deal with parasites, but there were so many other uses that they were finding. It goes on. There are few drugs that can seriously lay claim to the title of wonder drug. Penicillin and aspirin being two that have perhaps had greatest beneficial impact on the health and well-being of mankind. Sorry, didn't realize I was not going live. So those of you who were trying to join me online, I'm back online. So let's just go over that again. There are few drugs that can seriously lay claim to the title of wonder drug, other than penicillin and aspirin, being two that have perhaps had the greatest beneficial impact on the world's health and well-being of mankind. But ivermectin can also be considered alongside those worthy contenders based on its versatility, safety, and beneficial impact that it has had and continues to have worldwide, especially on hundreds of millions of the world's poorest people. So it was cheap and accessible, practically given to the world because it was so safe, it was so versatile, you could use it for so many things. Right. Several extensive reports, including reviews authored by us, this is the guys who published this, have been published detailing the events behind the discovery and development and commercialization of ivermectins and ivermectin, as well as the donation of ivermectin and its use to combating onchocerciasis and lymphatic filariasis. However, none have concentrated in detail on the interacting sequence of events involving the passage of the drugs into human use. When it appeared in the late 1970s, ivermectin, a derivative of ivermectin, was a truly revolutionary drug, unprecedented in many ways. It was the world's first endectocide and forerunner of completely new class of anti-parasitic agents, potently active against a wide range of internal and external nematodes and arthropods, so like worms, parasites, those types of things. So in the 1970s, a novel international public sector, private sector partnership was initiated by one of the authors himself, forming a collaboration with the US market based Merck. So Merck is one of those big pharmaceutical companies. They made a deal with Merck. Sharp and Doham, which is MSD, which is another pharmaceutical company. And under the terms of the research agreement, researchers at the Kitasato Institute isolated organisms from the soil samples and carried out preliminary in vitro evaluations of the bioactivity. So they realized that this thing was really amazing, and they got on with a pharmaceutical company called Merck, and they were able to bring ivermectin to the forefront. And this is really how ivermectin then became developed for human beings. They go through a lot of stuff about how, it dealt with parasites and all of that stuff like that. An important point, ivermectin is also highly effective against ticks. For example, they give an example of the types of ticks and cattle parasites, tropic and subtropic diseases, and which cause enormous economic damage, indicating of the impact in Brazil, where some 80% of bovine herds infested lost a total of $2 billion. So this was doing amazing stuff in animals, and it was crossed over into human use. Ivermectin proved to be even more of a wonder drug in human health, improving the nutrition, general health, and well-being of billions of people worldwide. Ever since it was used to treat onchocerciasis in humans in 1988, provided ideal in many ways, being highly effective, broad spectrum, which means that it can be used across many different things, safe, well tolerated, and could easily be administered. A single dose or an annual dose was all that was really needed. It was used to treat a variety of internal worms and larvae and all different types of stuff. So this was just being used in multiple different ways. It became an essential mainstay of the two global diseases and was used to help with the elimination campaigns to get rid of those two very disfiguring and devastating diseases. So the article goes on to talk about how they went into these poor countries and ivermectin became useful in all of these places. And eventually they started donating it. So for over a decade, They were exclusively based on spraying and using insecticides, and they were able to shift to using ivermectin, saving a lot of lives, saving the environment, and all of these different things. So in terms of the development of ivermectin for human use, so in the mid-70s, the global community mobilized itself. It wanted to really address these tropical diseases in different countries, and the UN created a special program for research training of tropical diseases, and this is where it really went into play. We're getting 20 to 40 million people in endemic areas where these parasites were found, and they really wanted to eliminate it because it was causing a lot of deaths in countries like Africa and South America and those types of places. And there was no safe or acceptable drug at the time to treat any of those infections. So they went on, they got the money, they were able to do the research, and they brought ivermectin to the market. And they found that basically it was so effective that most of these places, these diseases, and a lot of the blindness and other problems that these parasites were causing basically were eliminated with its use. Whilst using it, they found that it was very effective for other filarial diseases, lymphatic filaria, also elephantitis. So in the days, people with the large limbs due to some type of parasite infection. Over 1 billion people were affected by this. Over 120 million people were infected, and 40 million of whom were seriously incapacitated and disfigured. Ivermectin was the drug that they used to deal with that as well. So that was a game changer in poor countries using this drug, which they considered a wonder drug. The article goes on to talk about all the different areas and then kind of the mode of action of how ivermectin blocks neurotransmitters and causes these diseases to be treated. And so I'm just going to read another section called New Horizons, and we'll get into some of the more earlier data and how we now relate all that to COVID-19. So ivermectin, New Horizons, this is one of the last sections of this article, looked at how ivermectin continued to prove to be astonishingly safe for humans. And it was, indeed, it was so safe, such a safe drug with such minimal side effects, and that it could be administered by non-medical staff, and even persons who are literate in the community could be trained to give out this drug where it was necessary. Just needed some basic and appropriate training. So the fact that it helped to contribute to unsurpassed beneficial impacts that the drug had on human health and welfare around the globe, especially with regard to the campaign to fight the onchocerciasis. Today, and that was in 2011, of course, ivermectin is being increasingly used worldwide to combat other diseases in humans, such as strongyloidiasis, which is another type of worm, scabies. It just names a variety of different infections that it was started to be used to treat. New and promising properties and uses for ivermectin and other ivermectin derivatives are continuing to be found. So this is 2011. They had accepted that ivermectin was a wonder drug. It was used to treat all of these infective and parasitic diseases, and there were new uses that were popping up every day. There's also a lot of tropical diseases, and it was both direct and indirect beneficial, improving community health. Studies on long-term treatment with ivermectin could control these diseases had shown that the drug additionally associated with significant reduction in the prevalence of infection with soil-transmitted worms. So it was just so many different uses for using that. And even head lice for children, they were using it in. So they were just using ivermectin for so many different parasitic and other infection causes. And so it was basically called a wonder drug. That was 2011. That article basically was inside of the U.S. National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health, coming out of the proceedings of the Japan Academy Series B Physical Science Series. And so you can just look that up online. that shows you how people were looking at ivermectin in 2011. Now let's move now to 2021. We've heard all this controversy, all this talk, all these issues now with ivermectin. And, all of a sudden, it's a horse dewormer and all of these things. So I wanted to do my own research. I wanted to look it up on my own and see what it is. And so people have an understanding, because I think there's elements of politics, at play with everything that's happening now with COVID. There's elements of, financial gain and big pharmacology and all those types of things that are happening, that basically now interacting with a lot of information that's coming up. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to understand, and we have to read information for ourselves, and we have to seek knowledge on our own. So the next article that I really wanted to look at is one from Science Direct. This is another one of those online journals or places that doctors, scientists, and people who are interested go to find information that is reliable. And so this article that they wrote was called Ivermectin, a multifaceted drug of Nobel Prize honored distinction with indicated efficacy against a new global scourge, COVID-19. So this is a 2021 article, and they looked at the fact that, in 2015, remember all the amazing and great things that I just talked about, ivermectin being used in those different countries and being considered a wonder drug. In 2015, the guys that came up with it, guys who presented it to the world, they won a Nobel Peace Prize for their interaction with this drug. So in 2015, the Nobel Committee for Physiology and Medicine, in its only award for treatments of infectious diseases since 6 decades prior, honored the discovery of ivermectin, a multifaceted drug deployed against some of the world's most devastating tropical diseases. Since March of 2020, when ivermectin was first used against a new global scourge, COVID-19, more than 20 randomized clinical trials have taken such inpatient and outpatient treatment. So at the time of this article, which I believe was earlier in 2021, there were already articles and trials that were going on to investigate, is it safe, is it okay to use it in COVID? Because people already had started using it. Remember, it was a drug with many uses, and so people knew that it was safe. And now I'll tell you how they got to that conclusion after we do a look a little bit at this article in particular. So they looked at all of these articles, these trials that were being done, and 6 of the 7 meta-analysis on ivermectin treatment reported in 2021 found notable reductions in COVID-19 fatalities, which are deaths, so decreased deaths, with a mean reduction, relative risk of 31% of mortality versus control. So when they compared not using ivermectin to persons who were using ivermectin, they saw a death mortality rate decrease. So less death, 31% less death. During the mass ivermectin treatment in Peru, excess deaths fell by a mean of 74% over 30 days in its 10 states with the most extensive treatments. So they looked at Peru that was using it very highly, and within 30 days, they had an almost 75% decrease in their COVID deaths. All right. Reductions in deaths correlated with the extent of ivermectin distribution in all 25 states with a p-value of 0.02. So that's what we as doctor scientists measure how good something is. So the smaller that number is, the better the value of the study and the information you're looking at. So it's a very small number, which is a good thing, 0.002. The sharp reduction in morbidity using ivermectin were also observed in 2 animal models, SARS-CoV-2 and related in beta coronaviruses. So what they saw is that even in animals and in other viruses, they were seeing that there was reductions in death, even when you used it on animals and with other viruses that were very similar to COVID. The indicated biological mechanism of ivermectin, competitive binding with SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, is likely non-epitopic specific potency against emerging viral mutant strains. So what that says, and that sounds very, very complicated, but what the authors were concluding, which is very interesting. I haven't seen this anywhere else, but this is part of a meta-analysis. And when we talk about meta-analysis, it's a study that looks at a bunch of other studies. So this is like the best that you can get. It kind of brings all the data together and makes sense of it, right? So it doesn't just look at one study, it looks at multiple studies to make a conclusion, and that's how you get more concrete data. So what that last statement is saying is that the way that ivermectin likely works is that it binds to the spike protein. You always hear about the spike protein with virus, and that it works in such a way that even if there were new strains of the virus, it would still work. So this is published in Science Direct in a journal called New Microbes and New Infections, September 2021. That's very, very recent. So with all of the negative things coming out about this drug, you can still find very positive things out there. And, we as the world are moving to treatment. And, they said, there's not enough studies, Well, there are no studies that are done by Big Pharma because it's a cheap drug. It's already out there. But there are people doing studies looking at this information. That was very interesting. I won't go into the depths of it. There's a lot more information there. But that is the gist of that study, that basically what they found is when they looked at a lot of the data, they were finding actually quite positive findings for it. So there's a comment online. I think it's ivermectin is indeed a super drug. I had contracted the COVID and my doctor treats me with the drug. Very powerful stuff. I was glad to be treated with it because in the case I wasn't hospitalized, and I'm so glad the doctor did that. So I don't know. It's kind of controversial right now. I don't even know if doctors are using it so much anymore, but I know quite a few had actually looked at using it earlier on. But it's something that we now have to be open to looking at. Other large pharmaceutical companies are also looking at treatments now because we realize that we need different ways of dealing with the pandemic. And it is very likely with the pandemic becoming endemic that we will be moving towards a treatment protocol. And we should be on top of that because there are many countries, India that was using ivermectin, parts of South America, lots of parts of Africa. And that kind of moves me into why people even thought about ivermectin. And so there is another article also here. This is coming out of, looks like Colombia. Also can be found on the PMC website. And it's called COVID-19, the Ivermectin African Enigma. So what they found is that when COVID came out, people thought, hey, the poor countries, they're going to get devastated. They're going to get destroyed by this thing. But as time went by, they realized countries like Africa and certain places were not getting the type of numbers that you were seeing in America and Europe and all this stuff like that. People started thinking, hey, what is it that they're using widely across these countries? Why is it that they're not getting it? Why is there not as much death? And this is why people started looking at drugs like ivermectin, and even hydroxychloroquine at the time, which were being given to these countries freely. People were using it as prophylaxis. It was something everybody used it. And so you had large parts of the population that were not getting sick from COVID the way that we were seeing in other countries. And so the article looks at that. And that's where they get this idea of using ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and all these types of drugs from, because these people were not catching COVID that way. So the introduction of the abstract states, the low frequency of cases and deaths from SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19 virus in some countries of Africa has called our attention about the unusual behavior of this disease. The ivermectin is considered a drug of choice for various parasitic and viral diseases shown to have in vitro effects against SARS-2. The aim of this particular study, our study aimed to describe SARS-CoV-2 infection and death rates in African countries that participated in an intensive ivermectin mass campaign and carried out to control onchocerciasis and compare them with those of countries that did not participate. So what they did is they looked at the countries that were already using ivermectin across Africa, and then they looked at the countries that were not using it at that level. So they looked at data from 19 countries that participated in the World Health Organization sponsored African program for the control of that parasite. From 1995 until 2003, we compared 35 countries that were not included. They gathered a bunch of information from there. And they used these different models and computer analysis to kind of, make the information even. So it's something that you want to do in science. You don't want bias. So you try to eliminate that, and you can use different models and different ways to do those types of things. So after controlling for different factors, including human development and different aspects in these countries, they found that the incidence and mortality rates and numbers of cases significantly lower amongst the countries that were using ivermectin versus the countries that were not. That a mass public health preventative campaign against COVID-19 may have taken place inadvertently. And in some African countries with massive communities is an attractive hypothesis. Additional studies are needed to confirm. So just from that information of comparing those countries side by side, you're living here, I'm living here, one of you is using ivermectin, the other one isn't, they saw notable differences in the death rates from COVID alone. So by those countries being a part of that global initiative to get rid of those parasites, they had maybe inadvertently treated or prepared themselves to be less likely to succumb from it. And that's where the whole idea of, could ivermectin or one of these malarial drugs actually help? There's a lot of information there. You can take a look at all of that. Break. We're going to come back and look at some of the other studies that kind of link this all in. And then we're going to try to figure out why there's any negative stuff. And like I said, it's an open line. So you can give me a call, 323-6232, 325-4316, 325-4259. So I'll be right back after the break. This is Dr. D. Archer, and the doctor's in. I'm going fast, I'm sorry. Yes, producer, we can go to a quick break and we'll be right back. Maybe the producer is not there, I'm not sure. Producer, let me know if you're there. If not, I can continue on for a while, but I think we're supposed to go to a quick break. And it looks like the producer might be on a quick break. So, some of the places that ivermectin, India was using it for quite a while, and they got a lot of pushback from the World Health Organization and other places, but they actually had ivermectin as a part of their national protocol. I'm not sure if it's still there, but there are areas in India where we're going to take a look at and compare, where you can see also stark differences in the populations that were using it for like COVID versus those that were not. Also, you want to look at why are some of the studies showing that it's not effective and it doesn't work, and it has a lot to do with how studies are conducted. So if we look here in the Indian protocol, they actually have the amount of ivermectin and how long it is to be used and who should or should not use it. So like pregnant and lactating women. They also leave room for the use of hydrochloroquine and other drugs that they are using. Okay, someone's saying that I'm in and out. Let me just make that a little bit better. Is that a bit better? Maybe something is going on with, okay. I don't know. I'm not too sure what's happening. Okay. But I seem to have lost my producer, so I'm not sure if I am online currently or if this is an internet challenge. But today we are talking about ivermectin. I'm not sure. I was trying to take a break from the producer. I hope they didn't cut me off. But I think this topic was extremely interesting, and a lot of people had asked me about it. I like to be unbiased about these things and just give people the information that they're looking for. And so I had to also do this research to assist with some guidelines and some other things that I was requested to do. And so I had really been reading up on this stuff quite a bit and found a lot of interesting information. Also, there's some doctors in Florida that were also, well, not just Florida, but also in the United States that were also using ivermectin during that time. So let's look at another trial or study. And this is also from 2021. And this is in the National Library of Medicine, the National Center of Biotechnology and Information. It's PubMed, pubmed.gov. It's another search engine, like how people would use Google. We would use this as a medical search engine when we're looking for information. And it was published in the Journal of Pharmacology. And it was a randomized controlled trial. So when you hear that, that's one of the trials that people expect to find this type of information from. It's a very high value trial. And so this study was called the Evaluation of Ivermectin as a Potential Treatment for Mild to Moderate COVID-19, a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial in Eastern India. So you'll find that a lot of the trials that are presenting a lot of this really good information, they're not coming out of the US, they're not coming out of the UK and those places. They are coming out of like India and those types of places where have large populations. It's very easy to get the type of numbers that you need to provide the data. And sometimes they also get ignored. So Vanessa Colby says, they will censor, it may interrupt your broadcast. I hope not, I really hope not, but I don't know where my producer has gone to. So I'm just wondering what is happening right now. And I'm just wondering if people are hearing me on Guardian currently. So if you are also listening to Guardian and you can hear me, just if you can't hear me, please let me know. So this one goes into talking about why they did the study, and they said there's been growing interest in ivermectin ever since it was reported to have an in vitro activity against severe acute respiratory syndrome or coronavirus 2. The trial was conducted to test the efficacy of ivermectin in mild and moderate coronavirus. So what that meant is they actually looked in what we call in vitro, or like in lab, at the effects that ivermectin as a drug had on the viral illness of COVID. And usually that's the first step in anyone kind of saying, hey, do I want to go into looking at the use of this drug or how it would work in human beings? And so they saw that information and they were really, really interested. They wanted to kind of look at what that would be. So they did a very extensive study. And with this study, they were kind of inconclusive about it. And they talked about whether they needed to do more studies, and they weren't sure. They kind of talked about marginal benefits in discharged patients. It did say that, so they did not make a concrete decision in this particular study about it, but they saw that all the patients in the ivermectin group were successfully discharged. So nobody died. That was pretty good. And in comparison, the same for the placebo group was observed. The difference was found to be statistically significant. So there was a significant difference between those who had been given ivermectin and those who had not. And they found that none of the persons that had been given it early actually died. The question about finding different things is, really how are you treating the information? What doses are you using? What patients are you giving it to? When? From all of the studies that I've seen, ivermectin, if it was to be used, is something to be used prophylactically or in very, very early use. And so I found a really good website that did a meta-analysis on over 100 studies that had to do with ivermectin. Let me just try to put it up. And what this means is that this is almost as good as you can get. You're able to pull up just about every study, put it together, and make a decision. You hardly ever find those types of things. It seems to be escaping me right now, but it put together all the ivermectin studies all in one place. There it is. Okay, and you can check it out. It's called C19ivermectin.com. So someone decided, hey, I'm going to put together all the information on ivermectin, and I'm going to let other people look at it. So they looked at 64 ivermectin COVID-19 control studies and 30 randomly controlled trials. And what they found, what this website found, is that when they studied all of these and put all of these studies together, and the really cool thing about it is each study is linked on the website, and it's linked to a timeline that shows you when this information was discovered. So you can see the most recent update was October 26th. They have an article on there about ivermectin, real-time meta-analysis looking at 64 studies. So meta-analysis, as we mentioned, are the really big studies that look at lots of data, puts it all together, and are able to make conclusions. So what conclusions did they make? They made a conclusion that of the 64 trials, there were 627 scientists involved. There were also 30 randomized controlled trials, right, that were done. When they put all this data together, they found that there was an 86% improvement in 14 prophylaxis trials. So 14 trials looking at using ivermectin as prophylaxis or prior to getting COVID showed 86% improvement in overall success. They saw 67% improvement in 29 early treatment trials, 36% improvement in 21 late treatment trials, and 56% improvement in 26 mortality results. 56% improvement in 30 randomized control trials. And they did that all as a summary of results reported in ivermectin trials for COVID-19. Some of the other data that's presented there, it's a little harder for regular people to understand, but it basically showed very positive for ivermectin. And there were a few that were on the negative side that said they didn't really see any improvements or they saw some negative stuff, but they were basically overruled by all of the other studies. There's also a map on the same website showing all the areas that are using ivermectin in some form, more so than other. And if you see, India is really darkly covered because they're using a lot of ivermectin there. And, we'll talk a little bit about the differences in the different states in India as we go along. We also looked at they compare early treatment, all studies, and then some of the studies that didn't report so positively about it. And you'll see that there was 9 studies on the negative side, and the other 60, 70 studies were on the positive side. And you found that a lot of those studies, early treatment really was where you saw the most impact. There's a really beautiful slide on there as well that shows you the negatives and positives and each in particular study and how they report on their results for ivermectin. Okay, someone's saying I'm really clear on Guardian Radio, so the only thing I lost was my producer. I don't know where he went to. So producer, if you're back, please let me know so that I can take a quick break. And so that database looked at 126 studies. 82 of those studies were peer-reviewed, 64 with results comparing treatment and control groups. So this was really, really, really good. That kind of brought all the information together. And so even though there are some negative articles out there, the positives outweigh, but they're harder to find. So if you were to go and search for ivermectin online, the first ones that come up are a lot of articles that are very negative, that are saying a lot of stuff about, animal medication and all the stuff like that. But those are all opinion pieces. When we look at the actual data, we find that a lot of information is actually positive. And so it is something for us that we can consider. Okay, so the name of that website, C19 IVERMECTIN, ivermectin.com. Very simple. And it just gives you all of the data, the negative, positives, everything, and how they pan out together. There is an interesting, some of it isn't all the full stuff. So sometimes what you have to do when you're searching is you take the title of the article or trial, you take that, you put that in your search, and you find the full article if you want to do that kind of in-depth reading. And so I would say that another link that was in it, if you check right there where it says October 14, are major ivermectin studies designed for failure. So that article actually discusses the flaws of ivermectin trials and why some of them might actually come out negative. It's the way that they are being done. But with science, you want to eliminate as much bias as possible. So I like the international studies because they tend to be unbiased and just kind of, reporting the information. And this website does give both the good and the bad. So that is pretty good. So why would we want to even look at something like that? Because the world is moving to treatment. Here's an article about Pfizer moving towards an oral anti-COVID-19 therapy. These are the same guys that have made the vaccine, but they recognize that a vaccine-only approach is not the future, and that they are also must consider treatments. So Pfizer moves towards an oral anti-COVID-19 therapy. This is August the 2nd, 2021, News Medical Life Science, right? Written by Sally Robertson. Researchers in the United States have described a novel antiviral agent against severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, currently being evaluated in clinical trials as a treatment for coronavirus. Alongside vaccines, antiviral therapeutics are an important part of the healthcare response to counter the ongoing threat presented by COVID-19, says David Owen from Pfizer Worldwide Research in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and colleagues. So Pfizer is telling you that we have to look at different therapies, antivirals, and they are developing their own. And so we have drugs that we've been looking at and haven't made determination or made a decision about or have said negative things about without looking at the research. Why not look at these drugs that are cheap and available? I am sure that Pfizer's drug is not going to be cheap at all, because whenever you have a new drug, lots of money goes into development of that drug. They've got to make that money back. So even with the vaccines, which are considered free, it's being paid for somewhere. Someone's paying for it, and that money has to be made back. That company's making billions and billions of dollars over the last few years. It's because that money has to be made back. So the team has now described an orally biodegradable inhibitor of SARS-CoV-2. The inhibitor, and they give it a long name, PF07321-332, also exhibits in vitro pan-human coronavirus antiviral activity and excellent in vivo safety profile. So they are now moving towards their own version of some type of treatment so that when people do have COVID, they have options. And that's what we really need. We need options. And here is another article that was on Medrix. why COVID-19 is not so spread in Africa. How does ivermectin affect it? So these guys also was looking at Africa saying, hey, there's not much COVID there, people aren't dying. And they basically go on to say scientists have so far been unable to determine the reason for the low number of COVID-19 cases in Africa. And so Japan has a lot of this data that they've been looking at as well. So they wanted to evaluate the impact of ivermectin interventions on the morbidity, mortality, recovery rate, and fatality rates for COVID-19. They looked at a retrospective statistical analysis. So what that means is they looked back at what happened, and they looked at the study to look at the impact that ivermectin was having against COVID-19 between 31 countries that were using it and the community-directed treatment with ivermectin. And then they were looking at the non-endemic countries, similar to what we saw with the other study, the 22 other countries in Africa that were not endemic with those parasites that were using the ivermectin. The morbidity and mortality was statistically significantly less in the 31 countries using, of course, the protocol. And again, in this study was that the morbidity and mortality in those countries are less than those in the non-endemic ones. The community-directed onchocerciasis treatment with ivermectin is the most reasonable explanation for the decrease in morbidity and fatality rate in Africa in areas where ivermectin is distributed to and used by the entire population. It leads to a significant reduction in mortality, so that's death. So you say the other question is, it is a parasitic medication, so why would you use it for a viral illness? Luckily, they were doing studies showing how ivermectin actually has antiviral properties. And so would then make sense to try it out for COVID-19. Now note, like a country like the Bahamas, we really don't do much of our own studies. So for us to get to the next level of science was for us to do our own control trials, see what works for Bahamian people. We don't do that, so we always have to rely on a lot of information coming from elsewhere. So this was in May 2020, and this was on another medical search engine, Springer Link. It was just a brief communication, and it just kind of looked at, that even though ivermectin is an antiparasitic drug, that it also showed effective pharmacological activity towards various infective agents, including viruses. They were studying ivermectin. They were seeing as they were using ivermectin in the past, and up to 2020, when this came out in the archives of pharmacology, that ivermectin had properties in which it fought against viruses. So it made sense. It made sense that this drug could be used in something like COVID-19. So since ivermectin is an antiparasitic drug that has often shown also an effective pharmacological activity towards various infective agents, including viruses. This paper proposes an alternative mechanism of action for this drug that makes it capable of having an antiviral action, also against the novel coronavirus, in addition to the process already reported in literature. So these guys were saying that they had found that even the stuff that people were talking about, they still found that ivermectin had more versatility, and they want to describe other pathways in which ivermectin exists. And they wanted to show how well it worked on several viruses, both in vitro and in vivo, so in the lab and outside of the lab, in real life and setup life. Among the many mechanisms by which it performs this function, the most consolidated one sees ivermectin as an inhibitor of the nuclear transport mediated by importance. So it was looking at details, really, really scientific details that were pointing to the fact that there were all these different viruses that ivermectin was having actually positive results against. And so we cannot throw something like this away. Ivermectin could prove to be a powerful antiviral, therefore also useful for possible treatment for the new coronavirus-associated syndrome, even from new perspectives. This could happen assuming its role as an ionophore agent only hinted in the recent past, but never fully described. So they mentioned that, we've never really gotten fully into its uses. This isn't, remember, in 2011, and so why now would a wonder drug be treated in this particular way? I think it has a lot to do with, just the way that the world is going. And it's a cheap drug. Nobody is going to spend the money to go to the FDA to redo this because the FDA has already approved this drug for use. And so it has FDA approval in a sense, but not specifically for COVID-19. And that tends to be the issue. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that means, because some drugs are what we call off-label. And there are reasons why. If you go to the FDA website, they speak about off-label drugs and why you would use a drug for something other than what it has been shown or proven, let's say, taken to the FDA to be used. And they give various different reasons why you would want to use a drug off-label, right? So it's not your go-to thing. But remember, we were in a pandemic. We were open to using emergency use authorized drugs, experimental drugs at the time, and we were open to that. So, we also should have been open to things that were already kind of proven to be very safe and kind of figured out how we would use them appropriately. So if you go to the FDA website and you type in like FDA off-label drugs, you'll find information of what the FDA considers off-label and why you would even use an off-label drug. So something like an ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, what we would call off-label drugs. They were approved for certain things. We know that they're useful for other stuff. And sometimes in consultation with a physician, when used appropriately, can be used. So what is the FDA saying? It says, has your health provider ever talked to you about using an FDA-approved drug for an unapproved use, sometimes called off-label use, to treat your disease or medical condition? It is important to know that before a drug can be approved, a company must submit clinical data and other information to the FDA for review. So you see the FDA, you have to go to them, you have to submit the data, you have to put in those big studies and trials and all of that stuff. For a drug that's already has FDA approval for other things, I don't know who's going to spend that money, right? To deem that they're safe. So when you prescribe a drug for its approved use, you can be sure that it, that's gone through the FDA stuff. The drug is approved to be treated. So what about these kind of like off-label drug use? So what are examples of an unapproved use for approved drugs? Unapproved use for an approved drug is called off-label. The term can mean that the drug is used for a disease or medical condition that is not approved to treat, such as when chemotherapy is approved to treat one type of cancer, but healthcare providers use it to treat a different type of cancer. Given in a different way, such as when a drug is approved as a capsule, but is given instead of oral solution, or given in a different dose, such as when a drug is approved at a dose of 1 tablet a day, but healthcare provider to take 2 tablets a day. So before, we had kind of a lot of leeway to use different things because sometimes, certain things work. It's not exactly FDA approved for that, but it's kind of proven in a sense of use. Question online. Consorting our rates of obesity and comorbidities, why are we not looking generally at early treatments from a public health perspective? Do we have the capacity to apply for license to manufacture and produce ivermectin here? Well, we can do whatever we want. And the fact that ivermectin is an old drug means that it's probably not patented anymore. And if we really wanted to make it, we could probably. That would be up to, like policymakers and the pharmacy industry, all that type of stuff that have to go through there. But there's no reason why we can't make a lot of these things. As you know, a lot of the what we call generic drugs come out of places like India, because after drugs lose their patent, then it's easier to apply to make these drugs, even if you're not the person that discovered it. So yes, those things can be done. We have never really done that in the Bahamas. So that is interesting, but I think, as a country that is moving towards being more independent, we have to start looking at those things and improving things for ourselves. And so that is kind of really an important part of this whole idea of, oh, well, you're using this drug for what it's not supposed to be used. But as clearly as you can see outlined by the FDA, there are examples of drugs that are currently being used for unapproved reasons. They are approved they've gone through the FDA trials of being safe for human beings, but sometimes you can kind of veer off from that in certain circumstances, especially when there isn't available treatment. So if you have, in the case of coronavirus, I see why a lot of people were looking for things. Me personally, with my patients, I went with a very kind of a clean approach, really kind of attacking it earlier, vitamin supplementation, all that kind of stuff. But I can see the need for having additional stuff. So I still seem to have lost my producer. I would have liked to have taken calls, but I do not see the producer. Okay, yes, check with the site. Check with the site that I mentioned. That's got a lot of different articles on it, the one that I mentioned. And so I would like to have taken calls, but I don't know where it happened to my producer, wherever you are. Let me know if you are there so that callers can get in, but the producers seem to have disappeared. And so, yeah, it was very important for me to kind of go through that. A lot of people were asking about it. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with Guardian, why can't get callers in tonight, but I will definitely check and see what's going on. And possibly on my next show, if people want to call in about this particular subject, I will probably still allow it, because people were not allowed to call in today. And so, producer, wherever you are, I hope you're okay. I don't know if he left the studio, but he's not here with me. Okay? And so those were some of the main points that we wanted to discuss, and we wanted to take some calls. We seem to be having problems with Guardian tonight. Okay? But yes, so I think there's room for us to take a deeper look. I've suggested on the information that was, that should have read considering, okay, all right, no problem. I would suggest that it's something that we can look at, where the world is moving towards more treatment protocols in terms of COVID. I do believe that COVID will be endemic and that we will have to learn to live with it. And so we will have to deal with that overall. So since we have some time, we'll look at another article in the Journal of Antibiotics. It's called Ivermectin, a systemic review from antiviral effects of COVID-19 in a complementary regime. And it proposes many potential effects to treat a range of diseases with its antimicrobial, antiviral. So this is another one. And what I found interesting here is there were also anti-cancer properties. And this article also called ivermectin a wonder drug. So which year was this? This was 2020, before it was really, I guess, completely controversial. And they state antimicrobial, so that's all the parasites and stuff that we talked about, antiviral, which is viruses like COVID-19, and anti-cancer properties, and called it a wonder drug. It's highly effective against many microorganisms, including some viruses. And in this comprehensive systemic review, antiviral effects of ivermectin are summarized, including in vitro and vivo studies. So they looked over everything over the past 50 years, and they kind of brought all of that information together. Like I said, these type of studies are really, really good studies because they bring a lot of data together and make it easier. It talked about different viruses that actually they had tried ivermectin with. And they said that there was the effects were against the DNA or RNA viruses, such as equine herpes, poliomavirus, just a bunch of different stuff. And there was several biological mechanisms that they could see to use potentially as it is a candidate for more wide range use of viruses, including COVID-19, and as well as other types of positive single-stranded RNA viruses. In vivo studies of animal models reveal a broad range of antiviral effects of ivermectin. However, clinical trials are necessary to appraise the potential effects of it in a clinical setting. So this was before some of the clinical trials came out. They were seeing this as being very potential. So you have to wonder how it became so negative, right? There's another article, I don't know, but there is a state in India, Prada Pradesh, I think it's called Prada. And this is a state in which they used ivermectin quite a bit. And they used ivermectin prophylactically, so they were using it for pre-use as well. And what they found was they reduced their numbers significantly. All right. I've got to look for that article, but that state in India had over 220 million people in there, and I think their rates are super low right now. So the one that I saw today showed that there was less than 100 cases. Remember, there's 220 million people in this country, and only one death. So they're actually doing a lot better than us. They compared this state in India, this area in India, this really large city, to other cities that were close by that had similar numbers, had that density of population, and they were doing severely better than them. The ones that had only one mode or vaccine only kind of protocols. Uttar Pradesh, there you go. Uttar Pradesh. Pradesh was the one that had this going on. And so they were using ivermectin as their means of dealing with it, but nobody was out it. Nobody was bringing it to light like, oh, wow, this place practically cured itself of COVID. And so that was one of the things too that made me really kind of say, well, like, why are we talking about these particular things when they happen to be happening? And I think the WHO went into India and was like, no, you're not supposed to be using ivermectin. We're not sure about it, and you should only be using it in trials and different stuff like that. So the kind of the red tape or the politics of medicine, which there should never be politics in medicine, started playing a large role in what was going on. And so calling for there to be actual studies or trials being done or not using it whatsoever, which they were saying there's no evidence, there's no link, but here you had an area that was using specifically these drugs, was doing a lot of prophylaxis, and it doesn't have to be ivermectin. They were doing a lot of prophylaxis, a lot of early treatment type of things, and they were giving absolutely no coverage at all. And a lot of things they were saying, like, it wasn't happening and all of this stuff. But I actually saw a lawyer from India that was online, and she was talking to a medical doctor there. And she was speaking to their issues they were having with the World Health Organization kind of stepping in and kind of saying, we don't want you using it. I don't know how they got in India's decision making. But at the time, earlier this year, the government over there was saying that, it was working. So this article coming out of the IndianExpress.com, Uttar Pradesh government says early use of ivermectin helped to keep positivity and deaths low, claiming that timely introduction of ivermectin since the first wave has helped the state to maintain a relatively low positivity rate despite its high population density. And so they were openly, celebrating and saying this, but the world kind of was telling them, no. We're not seeing this when we study it, and you need to stop using it. So I'm not sure what's happening in India currently, but these places like Uttar Pradesh were definitely using ivermectin. So the article goes on to say, a year after the country's first COVID-19 cluster, with 5 cases reported in Agra district, Uttar Pradesh government has claimed that it was the first state to have introduced a large-scale prophylactic and therapeutic use of ivermectin, and added that the drug helped the state to maintain a lower fatality and positivity rate as compared to other states. Citing the results from Agra in the month of May and June last year, following which the use of ivermectin, a medicine to treat parasitic ailments, along with doxycycline, so they were using it in combination with antibiotics actually, was produced as a protocol across the state for both prophylactic as well as treatment purposes. The state health department said it would conduct a control study once the second wave of the pandemic had subsided. So they were having quite a bit of success. And they were the first state in the country to introduce that on a large scale, and their numbers have remained very low. Even though we have all these amazing studies and stuff, it's nothing like real life when you are dealing with this type of thing. And so you can clearly see that some people were having great success. I think it's something that we should look at. I think we should do our own killer, and I don't think it would be hard to do this study. It would be actually probably quite simple. And in my actual recommendation, I looked at persons who were high risk or frontline workers would be more likely the people that you would look at some type of prophylaxis with. You may not want to do that entirely with everyone, but here we have Uttar Pradesh that actually did this across the board with all of their people. And they determined that they had really good outcomes. And that compared to other Indian cities, they were doing really, really, really well. And I looked at their protocol as well at one point, and it was quite interesting that they had that in their protocol as well. And it seems like different parts of India were doing different things. And so it was actually easy when you have these large countries to be able to compare how something works because their populations are so large. So they were being pressured to actually remove it from their India's national protocol. And it's kind of gone quiet ever since there's been pushback against it. And so I think, I think what's going to happen is that those areas that are seeing gains from something like that will continue in its use quietly, but maybe on a broader scale, maybe not as much. So they got a lot of pushback from using ivermectin, but they do. And there are other countries that are using it as well. And so we have a lot of the African countries that were just using it because it was there. It was a part of their national protocol for other South American countries that were also included. And when we look at the distribution list of, who's being really affected by COVID, we can see that a lot of the countries that have focused on an early treatment plan protocol have actually had much better results than those who just kind of, let's wait and see what happens, right? And I find personally with even my own patients, just about anything that we do and we treat symptomatically, we have good outcomes. People forget that 99.6% of people do not die from COVID. Most people make it through. Some people do have some longer lasting effects, but those can be treated. I just had a patient today post-COVID. We did some post-COVID therapy, and a lot of these things can be resolved. So I think we need to start looking positives in this situation. We've been looking kind of glass empty. We're looking at the small 0.4, 0.1%, and we're saying, we got very frantic about all of that. But at the end of the day, it should be about saving lives, not any particular agenda or protocol, but what really works and what works for us and what works for Bahamians, because that might not be the same as elsewhere. We have a very high-risk population, and as such, we should be focused on a well-rounded program that also includes early treatment. And yes, Ms. Kobe Online, even first world countries, a lot of first world countries did not do well with COVID. And that it is because of the approach that we took and that they took, and we've seen that. You mentioned here online, she's mentioning that first world countries, with high jab rates, have some of the highest positivity and death rates. Go figure. And that's absolutely true. And that's why you see there is a move towards treatment. Because some of the most highly vaccinated countries are on boosters, are on third and fourth boosters. If we look at Israel, and the pharmaceutical companies themselves are saying now that we need to incorporate treatment protocols. This is something that we could have done from last year. And so sometimes small nations need to figure out what is best for them, because first world countries or large nations don't always get it right. And at the end of the day, we want to save Bahamian lives. We want to save lives in general. And if there are things that we can do to save lives, to keep people out of hospital, which is supposed to be the goal, keep them from dying, then we should explore it. Because sometimes the loudest voices are not the best or the right voices. Sometimes we have to veer off the agenda-driven path and look for what is best for us and our people. Sometimes we can be the innovators. Sometimes we can be the ones determining the right path. I don't agree that just because we should only follow and we have to look for everyone else. I think there are brilliant Bahamians right here. I think we have the human resources to do a lot more than we're doing currently. But we need to be able to explore that. We don't always have to follow the leader. There's a saying, I forgot who says it, but when the world is running towards a cliff and you're running in the other direction, you look like the crazy person. I've said this before. And sometimes that's how the world is. Everyone's running towards a cliff because everybody's going in that direction. So the guy who says, hey, I'm going the next way, he's looked at as a nut. Where's that guy going? Well, he's not going over the cliff. That's what he's not doing. So sometimes it's not good to be the follower. Sometimes it's good to be the thinker and the innovator and the creator of our own paths. We have an opportunity. We are strategically placed between, I guess he's controversial too now, Columbus, but he had to pass through the Bahamas to get to the so-called New World. We are the gatekeepers for many things. And I think it's time that we take our position with that. And I think the world will appreciate a voice, a new voice. A trendsetter. Everybody loves a trendsetter. But you have to be strong in your foundation. You have to set out to do things differently. And so as a community, as a health community, I hope some of my fellow doctors also open their eyes, because we are in the business of saving lives. And we have to think outside of the box. We have to be a little bit more innovative I think we've all gotten too comfortable with being able to just follow the world and do what the recommended guidelines have said. Maybe it's time for us to make recommendations. Maybe it's time for us to do our own studies. Maybe it's time for us to determine the goal here. It's time. You know, what's the sense of having all of this education to be followers? It's a lot easier. Definitely. It's a lot easier. Yes, producer, I don't know where you've been. We have a caller. You'll have to take him quickly. Caller, you're on the air.
And I will make it very quick, Dr. D. I wish I'd caught you earlier. How you doing?
Yes, sir. I know. We just got back to this.
Indeed.
Go ahead, sir. Welcome.
Israel did some research some years ago on the lemon grass. They found out that there's an element in the lemongrass that kills cancer cells, only cancer cells. They describe that process as the cancer cells committing suicide. Now, why am I saying this? During this COVID-19 pandemic, I am one of the few Bahamians who has been crying out for us in the Bahamas to study our natural plants as an option, viable option to fight COVID-19 and other illnesses out there. Now, I know you have the medical establishment and all of those who think that many of them think that holistic is not the way to go. But of course, you know, when they advertise a lot of the pharmaceuticals, they're telling you this one could cause this one and this one could kill you. They're telling you up front. My point is, in terms of being leaders in the right way and in the right thing, we in the Bahamas, in my humble opinion, missed a wonderful opportunity to be a country leader and a world leader in terms of pursuing health remedies, not just for COVID-19, but particularly to fight COVID-19, because I believe, as God did say, that the healing of the nation is in the leaves of the trees. And who better to know what is out there than God who created this stuff? What'd you say?
I totally agree, doctor. Yeah. You know, I am traditionally trained as a doctor and specialist, but right. I embrace a holistic approach. Right. If you look at the early parts of medicine, this is where we got a lot of our ideas for medical treatment.
Exactly.
What you had happen is you had a lobbying of large pharmaceutical companies that wanted you to kind of leave that alone because we were able to put it in a pill, which is fine. Convenience is great. There are some really awesome drugs out there that have saved people's lives. Right. But we cannot forget where it all started and it came from. Exactly. And when you're talking about innovation of health, sometimes going back to the root of things is where you belong. And there's been lots of
pun intended, right? Going back to the root of things, no pun intended, right? The plants, the trees.
That's right. And so even our soursop has been shown to have anti-cancer properties. You know, we have things sitting here in our country that people are coming in and studying and doing what they want.
And taking to their countries and benefiting from, and we're not.
Yeah, and then, you know, you wonder where this miracle drug came from and that miracle drug came from. And, you know, these are in our plants and we're just like wandering around aimlessly, like we don't have an understanding of the value of our resources and the things that we have. So the Bahamas should be a place where all of your specialists in marine life should be, all of your specialists in plant life and indigenous crops to the Bahamas. Yeah. People should be coming here to learn from us. There's something wrong because there's a disconnect between leadership and the true potential of this country.
See, this is why I was calling on the Natural Sciences Department at the University of the Bahamas to take the lead during the COVID-19 and go out there and pursue these things. And everybody's saying, these things cost money, these things cost money. That is true. But are we not going to pursue healthy options just because they cost money? I mean, it seems like people can find money to do almost anything on this planet. Why couldn't somebody come together, find an innovative way to raise money that is going to benefit the giver of the money and the researchers who would use the money, and let the natural sciences department at UB go out there and study. Even now, that's something they can and should be doing.
Because we don't appreciate those things.
Not only that we don't appreciate them.
When I was doing my specialty and I needed funding and support for my research, nobody really wanted to do it. They were just like, "What? You're doing research?" It was not like. And I come from a background, my underground in Canada. If I wanted support for my research, I would have gotten it from all over the place.
Wow, isn't that something?
It's just not respected here.
Yeah.
And because we're small, a lot of things have to start with the government. When they show an appreciation for something, then other people jump on board. That's just the culture here.
To me, it is a very harmful culture, because if one is so top-heavy dependent, meaning the typical Bahamian is dependent on the government all the time, you're always going to be held hostage to the system in terms of getting things done, because you have I understand we have about 50 species of orchids in the Bahamas, for example, some of which have already been studied and may possibly hold the remedy for some illnesses out there. Some of
they come here and study, because we don't really bother or check. Like, anyone could just come here, jump on a plane, spend a month here, and do whatever they want.
Well, I hope
who checks that stuff?
I hope people are listening to you and really take what you have to say. They ain't gotta listen to me, because people tell me I just talk too much, but it ain't so much so the who doing the talking. It's what the talk is all about. So hopefully they listen to you, Dr. D, and go out there and get into the dirt, literally and figuratively, and find out the wealth and resources in the bush that we have, that God has given us in this country, because every pharmaceutical, just about every single one of them, started in some bush, somewhere in somebody's forest. Thank you. God bless, and have a good evening.
All right. Thank you, caller. I think that was an excellent way to end the show. Definitely, we have so many resources. So if we get anything out of this, it's that the Bahamas, we can take another path, whether it be medical or whatever way we decide. We have so much potential. Let's determine the future for ourselves. I want to thank you all for listening tonight. Those of you who are online and stayed with me through the entire broadcast. This is Dr. D. Archer, and I'm a family physician, brought to you by Medical Concierge Services and a consultant at PHA. And thank you for listening tonight. And I will see you all next week. Same time, same place, Guardian Radio, 7:30 p.m. Good night.